Okay, we are live.
Good evening and welcome to the virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. The Ohio legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to conduct virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government and will be holding our meetings online and live streaming on YouTube until further notice. You can access the live stream on the city's website. We welcome your comments on cases. In order to submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. Your questions and comments will be relayed to the commission by the meeting moderator. Please provide a valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. We want to accommodate public participation and comments to the greatest extent possible, and we certainly appreciate your patience. At this time, I call us to order, and we will wait. We will pause for just a moment as the flag is displayed. Those in the meeting, if you could turn your video off and your audio on to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. All right, Ms. Beal, welcome this evening. Could you please call roll?
Okay. Mr. Grimes?
Here.
Ms. Call?
Here.
Ms. Fox?
Here.
Mr. Snare?
Here.
Mr. Sublak?
Here.
Mr. Fishman?
You're muted, Warren.
Here. And Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. I'm looking for a motion to accept tonight's documents into the record and approve the minutes from September 17th.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Kennedy? Ms. Kennedy, Mr. Grimes, thank you. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Sublak?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes.
Mr. Snare?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and planning of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council will receive recommendations from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of these administrative cases must be sworn in. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. All right, it looks like case number 1, Property Maintenance Code Update, case 20-097, Admc, Administrative Code Amendment. This application is a request for review and a recommendation of approval to City Council for an amendment to section 153.076 of the City of Dublin Zoning Code to provide regulations for enforcement procedures and additional property maintenance regulations. Ms. Noble, welcome this evening. Very nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Very kind. The current code amendment that's before the Planning and Zoning Commission is related to property maintenance. We have discussed this topic before, as well as this topic has been before various boards and commissions, including City Council, the Architectural Review Board, and the Public Service Committee. So there's been numerous discussions related to updating our endeavors for property maintenance. The most recent interaction with this particular commission was the joint commission the joint meeting that would have had occurred with the Architectural Review Board in June. And we were provided some guidance as to what the Architectural Review Board and in both the Planning and Zoning Commission would like to see for the code amendment. We feel like we've addressed the concerns by both entities, as well as shared a draft code with the Architectural Review Board as recently as September 23rd. The current code modification does include various aesthetic requirements that we're requiring for property maintenance, as well as administrative processes, including references to our administrative order. And most importantly for this board, because I believe we've not discussed this before, are exemptions that would apply to property owners that would not be subjected to enforcement processes. And I would refer you to page 4 that starts those. There's 4 requirements that we've included that would exempt a property owner from enforcement processes. So at this point, we feel like we've addressed everything that we've been provided for in terms of feedback from all of the entities, and we'd like to address any comments that the commission would have.
Thank you very much. Looking to the commission for questions. Ms. Fox, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I guess I can. I do have a couple. One of the comments I'd like to make is I thought the intent paragraph was extremely good. I think it gave good guidance for any commissioner, any code enforcement officer, or anyone who read it to get an idea of what the purpose of the vacant structure ordinance was. I wondered about a couple of things. On page 2, C3A, where it talks about missing or broken windows, openings covered by some glass or other rigid transparent materials. I believe that might contradict the paragraph above, which is C2, C1, where you say that you can only secure with glass materials for windows. So I personally think glass is the preferable material, and I would prefer to see that instead of any other transparent material like plexiglass, rigid plastic, flexible plastic. So I think they contradict. So I think I would suggest glass. On page 4, under accessory structures 3L, because accessory structures is defined under the vacant structure definition, it's included. Accessory structures are included. It says included an accessory building. I think that might be better stated as shall be free from safety, health, and fire hazards and shall comply with all vacant structure regulations under this code, instead of all village regulations, because you define under the definition that an accessory structure that is vacant is a vacant structure, therefore it should comply with the regulations under this code. That would be, excuse me, my suggestion. The other thing that I noticed is page 5, under a building that's for sale or listed, shall be exempted for a 12-month period from the start of vacancy. I'm not quite sure what start of vacancy is, because if you beta test that against some of our problematic vacant structures, when would you call the start of vacancy? When an owner purchased it, when it's been vacant for years? And then also, maybe 12 months is I think 12 months is an awfully long time for a property to sit just because it's for sale or listed, and then not be able to be enforced under the vacant property regulations, because that's one of our problems, is they sit too long for sale. They go into disrepair. So, I'm worried that 12 months that exception is too liberal. Because a lot can go wrong with a house sitting vacant for 12 months just because it's for sale or listed. And then if it's changed hands like some of the ones have, they'll just stay for 3 years like that. They'll sell, they'll still stay vacant. So I think that's worthy of consideration. So those were my main thoughts.
I mean,
Thank you,
Jane,
Ms. Fox.
I just wanted to respond to that last point. I did struggle with this comment about, I mean, because if you think about our current market right now, 12 months does seem to be a significant amount of time. So, I mean, but in 2 years, does that change? So I really struggle with how to deal with how long to allow properties to remain, I guess, exempt from these regulations if it's for sale. I mean, it's a fine balance, right? I mean, we want them to be well kept. So I'm not sure if you have ideas of,
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
I'm looking for suggestions. I mean, I honestly was even thinking 3 months, like something that's manageable that we can at least work with our code enforcement officers to extend if necessary. But that's just an idea.
Yeah, my suggestion might be, I thought to myself, well, just because a house is for sale or for lease doesn't preclude them from having to be regulated under any standard property maintenance regulation that we have for any house in the city. I don't think you get an exemption because you're for sale that you don't maintain your property. So whether or not you say that any house that's for sale or for lease falls under all normal village regulations for property maintenance. But if there should be a problem, because your house is vacant and there are continual concerns, your property will then fall under the vacant property nuisance regulations. I mean, something like that, because there's a standard you have to keep anyway. But if you fall below that standard and you're a vacant property, then this might kick in. Something like that. So that you don't, it's just a thought.
So, Ms. Noble, a question to piggyback on that. Provision on the same page, D, under exemptions, item 7, where we have the ability of any property owner to make a written request for exemption, and where that property could be listed, could not be listed, anything that qualifies as vacant structure, we have the out. So to Ms. Fox's point, we don't necessarily have different standards for those vacant properties or the homes that aren't currently occupied, the structures that aren't currently occupied. Would striking C, defining it somewhere else where it says any vacant structure is, occupied, unoccupied, whatever we call out, but it for sale, not for sale, it doesn't matter, defining it as such, and then including it, but also including the out, does that accomplish the same?
I was thinking the same thing.
It also gives us, to the point of, the loose language of start of vacancy, it also gives us a clear, defined date with a letter submittal.
Yeah. I think that's reasonable.
And then perhaps when determining whether a request should be granted, allowing the flexibility for that amount of vacant time. So in the industry in which I work, everything is, Ms. Noble, looking at the average time on the market or something like that, where it's sequence based so that it does adapt to different market conditions. So even if we're looking at those benchmark and saying, okay, it's 1.5 times average on the market. And so if the average time on the market in the city of Dublin is 10 days, well, guess what? You get 15 days. If average time on the market is 3 months, you get 4.5 months. that is up for consideration. So not guaranteed granted, but up for consideration if we wanted to do something like that in that final provision. All right, let's go back to the commission. Ms. Kennedy, did you have any questions for staff at this point?
No questions. Actually, Jim picked up 7C, which I was going to ask about as well, but I think the discussion is moving in a direction that I would agree with in terms of rolling it under 7D. So no questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Schneer? Looks like he may be having internet connection issues. His image just went away. Let's go on to Mr. Grimes. We'll come back to Mr. Schneer.
I like it. I like the list of, I think it toughens the regulations, and it gives the tools necessary to staff to manage it in an effective and efficient manner. And all the other comments, I feel the same way, because it would be difficult to say, oh, when was it for sale by owner, and when did you vacate, and when did the time clock start? All those kind of things. That's just grounds for argument and not a meeting of the minds. So yeah, I like revising, taking that out. That's a good idea. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Supelak, questions for staff at this point?
Nope. This is obviously ongoing refinement, but it's all been in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak. Mr. Fishman? You're muted, Warren.
Am I on now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I agree with everything that's been said. The time limit thing, I think, is really hard to enforce, and whether a house is empty or occupied, it has to meet the standards. Okay, so if somebody reports that a house is run down, whether it's empty or not, I don't think so. The glass thing, I think, is important. I think it's important to make sure the house looks as occupied as possible. If you start putting plexiglass in the windows or boards or whatever, then anybody knows it's not occupied, just like our famous houses down off of 161. I was thinking before this discussion, I was thinking about when I made notes, I put 3 months maximum as far as vacant, but again, that's almost impossible to enforce. And what was the other thing I put? And I think there shouldn't be differentiating between for sale or not for sale. That's all I have now.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Schneer.
Let's see. Well, I don't think you can hear me, can you?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'll make it short. I thought it was a vast improvement, and I think I'm getting feedback. So I'm going to keep working on my own IT guy.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Staff, have we received any public comment on this item?
We have not.
Thank you. All right, we kind of jumped around this evening, but the call outs that I have, I just want to get consensus from the commission. So I have in item 3A, contradictory to item C, 2C1. So staff looking for a recommendation to you if the commission's desire is to have plexiglass and the like excluded, looking to staff for a recommendation on rewording that requirement if we get consensus. So before we move in that direction, if I could get straw poll, I think I heard 4. So yep, I have at least 4. So staff recommendation on the rewording.
Honestly, I would probably say that we would, for any type of window coverings, that we would require glass, and any type of other openings, we would require appropriate materials.
I believe that is acceptable.
Yeah, and I
Moving
think,
on to-
sorry. Yeah, I think that we can probably even get it to be more precise than appropriate. I'm not sure if I have the building materials vocabulary for it, but some portal covering for doors and glazing for windows. Just so that we're not leaving appropriate up for interpretation.
No, that's a good comment. Brad.
Yeah, the precision would be appreciated.
Basically, that it has to meet compatibility standards with the neighbors.
I think that is acceptable and appreciated. Now, looking back to legal for advice, if we're dealing with some of our problem or nuisance structures don't really have immediate adjacent neighbors. So how would it be enforced if we have kind of these off in their own little area structures if we can't really define neighbors?
Well, each neighborhood is a little different, as you point out. So we have some that are on acre lots or more, and some that are on half-acre lots. I think what we would be able to do defensively is to take into account for these areas where there are larger lots and more remote houses, broaden our net so that if it's in a place that has a more rural character, then we take in to account a greater number of, perhaps a greater radius to account a representative sample of housing. And it could perhaps even be as wide as an entire zoning district if we have like a straight district, which I think some of these properties probably are, where we wouldn't have more clustered developed housing, but kind of single parcel developments are probably still in straight zoning districts. So that might be a way that we can get down as well.
Ed, could we make it as simple as just saying that materials that would normally be appropriate for development? So if there's, I'm trying to think of like a PUD that might have specific requirements for their building materials. We'd want them to be the same building materials.
Well, right. I get a little leery about using the word appropriate, but where you're in a PUD, you have permitted facade materials and fenestration materials. When you are in a straight zoning district, we have residential exterior materials that are elsewhere in the code that are generally applicable outside of PUDs. So that could be a way to help with that compatibility point.
So I appreciate the permitted language rather than appropriate language. So if we could define what the adjacent properties are, if that is, like structures, if that is zoned properties within a time span so that they apply to code. What I'm looking for is to reduce the likelihood that they're going to grab a different vacant property and say, hey, look, that's my neighbor, therefore I'm in compliance. All right. Then I had one other question on 7A. The first exemption says, having a valid building permit. I haven't had to have a building permit issued in the city of Dublin, but I have walked by some structures in residential neighborhoods where it seems like they're under construction for a very long time. They're not a fire damaged property, so they wouldn't fall into that next category. But the dumpster is outside. There are sometimes some holes through roofs or sides of structures, and it's been there for months and months and months on end with no activity. So the duration granted within a building permit and extensions, what are our rules and regulations for how long a building permit can be active or extended and therefore qualify for this exemption, with no progress being made. What I'd hate is a neighborhood to have one of these problematic houses and somebody say, okay, well, I paid the hundreds of dollars for the building permit and now I'm not doing anything because I don't want to pay the tens of thousands of dollars to renovate. So I'm just going to keep renewing and make incremental. So what are our extremes? What could neighbors expect to see in that case?
I mean, Jenny can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a building permit's valid for 12 months. So, I mean, I'm trying to think, and again, I'm trying to balance, giving liberties to people who are actually making progress versus property owners that might intentionally not be making progress. I don't know if making some sort of clause that says if we don't feel like there's significant progress, I don't know if maybe even Thad would be the better person, but we could revoke the building permit. I just don't know how to get the timing right.
My concern is mostly, Thad, with the language where it says a building under active construction renovation and having a valid building permit at the time of inspection shall be exempt. So I realize it's active construction, but how do we define active construction? I have a building permit and therefore I'm actively constructing my house. But the shall be versus maybe and some conditions on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that point because I have seen instances where people maybe get a building permit with the good intention of finishing repair, and one thing or another goes wrong and it languishes. So I'll work with Tammy and I can reconvene on 7A and pull out what, maybe it's a may be exempt, or and they may be exempt provided that they are under active construction or improvement, and then we can provide some more to flesh out what active construction is. That it's my sense is that the intention of the commission is that active construction is not hanging a shingle every other week, right?
Can I?
Let's go Ms. Fox and then Mr. Fishman. So Ms. Fox, do you want to?
Well, yeah, I do think it's important that if we have someone actively working on things, we all know that sometimes construction time schedules are totally outside the owner's ability to control. I know even in my own house, it's hard sometimes to get the work done timely. So I think the intention here is that if they're actively working on it, and if the wording is such that that is proven, that they would be exempt. But if you know that, you'll be able to tell the difference, and somehow the language just needs to be able to show that intention.
Agreed. Thank you, Ms. Fox.
Right. Perhaps if they. Oh, sorry.
I was also going to say, I think the very nature, and it's been a while since I've been specifically in the game on this side, but I think there's also merit to double checking the threshold of effort to get a building permit, because in Dublin it is not easy. And so there's a certain amount of even cost of entry there. They are not just handed. I don't think they're just handed out. I could be wrong. I don't know about the minor building permit provisions, but some sort of clarification around that might help alleviate this concern. I think we're all sort of mentally building the trap that perhaps they can walk in and get a really easy building permit and then just sit on it for a while. And I don't think that's what the building permit process is. It's far more cumbersome than that. So I think some clarification there would probably help resolve this discomfort.
So let's go Mr. Fishman, and then we'll go back to Mr. Schneier. No, you just muted yourself. Yeah, now you're unmuted.
Okay, I understand. As I went through this, though, we don't right now. We're not focusing on the thing that probably motivated this was the duplexes off of 161, that have been sitting for 3 or 4 years empty and there's no construction going on. I assume as I went through this, that's strictly a code enforcement issue, but we are developing the code. But like, will he have to put glass windows in and mow the grass and all that stuff? I mean, how are we addressing that with this?
So Pat, do you want to field that one?
Right. So with this, if it would go into place and if those properties would remain in the condition that they're in, then, for example, the glass windows would have to be put into place. If they're not mowing now, the city has the ability to go on and mow and bill them for it. It's been a while since I've been by those properties, but the grass can be addressed now. The look of them is what this is geared to address. So that would include the windows and include getting them into a more well-kept and secure appearance.
Okay, we've been talking about building permits and getting it built, but those are just sitting there, and we have several around Dublin that people haven't even brought up. I guess the stars of this whole show are the duplexes off of 161. But I think the goal is to get them to look like they're occupied because they're attracting vagrants and all kinds of things, because it's very obvious they're not occupied. And so I was hoping that this would do that, and so a lot of it's up to code enforcement, I understand, but I just want to make sure we include that.
Yes, Mr. Fitchman, I agree, and you point out some very important items. I think one of the things we were looking at is making sure that there aren't exceptions that the problem properties throughout the city could fall into, and therefore residents would still have to see the same types of nuisance structures adjacent to their own properties.
Right, well said.
Right, thank you. Mr. Schneer?
I agree. That being said, I'm concerned about the balance between trying to avoid a builder gaming the system with the example one shingle at a time sort of thing, which are better angels. I'd like to think that's the exception. And if we try to legislate against that, then I'm worried that we overreach and run the risk of being arbitrary. So when, as Thad's going to point out, trying to define active could be, that's just subject to all sorts of interpretation. If you try to limit the interpretation, then you've got all sorts of, code and specificity. So we're using the duplexes as the benchmark, and maybe we should just take a step back and find a common ground here between the two.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. I know sometimes we get caught up in we've heard about the issues, that we want to try to solve the issues, but at the same time, making sure that we are being very, very thoughtful, very pensive in how this affects everyone. And so we don't want to go after just the nuisance while at the same time hindering some of the development that makes Dublin into what it is. So thank you for the level set. It is definitely appreciated.
And to Jane's point, I mean, anybody who has built here, as many of us have, those delays, we could be on the other end of this. Any of us who's built a home could be on the other end of this because a sub didn't show up for a long period of time. And that's my concern. You're well-meaning and get caught up in the regulatory morass.
Yeah. So looking back to staff, Lauren, it looks like you're talking, but you're muted.
I agree 100%. And I don't think it applies normally to new construction. I think we're talking about more maintenance or remodeling where the person runs out of money. I think people stop building when they run out of money. That's been my experience. And so I think Lance is exactly right. I think we should not put strict time limits on somebody building a house, because it is, especially now, it's unbelievable to get people. So, but I think that when I'm looking at this with putting windows in and those kind of things, we're talking about houses that are run down because the person ran out of money or doesn't care. So I think it's two different categories. Thank you.
So staff, I'm looking for some clarification here. It looks like on our agenda tonight, you are looking for a motion to recommend approval. However, there are some language items that we're still working through. So looking to you for recommendation with these items. The ones that I have that I believe we have general consensus from the commission are the structure, glass for the window type structure, the other appropriate materials or permissible materials in non-window areas, the tightening up the exemptions on the construction while still weighing the active, defining what that active project is, and making sure that, to Mr. Schneer's point, that active isn't necessarily defined as activity every day, but rather progress being made. And if progress is not being made, then there is legitimate reasons why. So making sure that we have that definition. And then the final page, the duration of the for sale. And so removing that and making sure that it was not called out as a different standard for those properties that are for sale for lease. So given that we have those changes, what is staff's recommendation for next steps as you are looking for an approval tonight?
I mean, I have clear direction in what I think that you're looking for. We have two options that I could present. One is that I can make them.
You were unmuted.
I'm trigger happy. I'm sorry. I could make the modifications and present them back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, or the next step is to make the modifications and then present them to council. So I would look for your direction.
So I believe that we provided clarity and consensus this evening. So I would be comfortable in staff making those changes and presenting to council, but looking for consensus among the commission.
Agreed.
I have 5. Fantastic. Mr. Fishman, was that a question or was that an affirmative?
I have a question. I do have a question before we wrap this. Is included on that page 4 about the accessory structures? Was that one of the I didn't hear Ms. Call mention that one, but about the accessory structure and that it would fall under the regulations of the vacant property.
Yes, I believe there's consensus there as well. Sorry, I didn't have that in my margin. I had it in line, so it didn't stand out.
And then one other thing I wanted to mention, and I didn't mention, I don't know how I missed it, but right below that on number 4, on the right of entry and inspections. Hold on. I wonder if the owner has failed to maintain a property and it has been maintained by the city may enter or re-enter. I wonder if it would be advantageous to say if the owner has failed to maintain a property and it has been maintained by the city or repeatedly cited, the city may enter. I'm just wondering, sometimes the city doesn't actually maintain anything, but it would be very nice to be able to, I don't know, that's a legal question. If you really want to go in and see if it's really safe, then if your only ability to do so is if the city has maintained it, it doesn't seem to me like you have much option here, but I also don't think you want to have the city go in unnecessarily or whenever. There's property interest here. So if a repetitive citation situation happened and or it has been maintained by the city, would that be a standard?
So Thad, looking to you about the legal means that the city has to enter personal property.
Right. So this section is geared, at least in my eyes and as I've read it, to exterior areas. So one thing that the city commonly does now is it mows property, and in theory it could go in and put in other repairs to the exterior of a property and charge those against the underlying land. And that is a right that has been recognized to avoid that kind of blight. I would not, under any circumstances, recommend the city go into a structure without either there being a very immediate emergency or obtaining a warrant, which this type of language would help in going to a court and saying, we have factors A, B, and C that suggest to us that the interior of this structure is unsafe because it has been vacant, and we can see these items on the outside. And we have addressed in our code that we want to be able to go inside. But I wouldn't go inside a structure without getting a judge to sign off on it first, regardless of the number of citations. I think that the citations are not germane to the issue of the city being able to go onto a property and abate nuisance conditions on the exterior. If there are nuisance conditions on the exterior, that kind of is what it is, regardless of citations.
That's fine. I brought it up only because in some vacant property ordinances that are seen in other towns, that is one of the things that they add in. And I'm not necessarily for it. I just wondered if it gave you the leeway you were looking for. But it's, we'll beta test this as we go along, I'm sure.
Yeah. I just don't think that the multiple citations moves the ball for us. And I wouldn't want to create a false sense of authority by that.
Just nitpicky item. Can we change the insure, like we're buying insurance, to the insure verifying? I just caught that one. All right. Commission, looking to you. Any other comments on this item before I am looking for a motion? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Mr. Grimes, second. Ms. Field, over to you.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Snare,
Yes.
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beal. All right, item number 2 this evening, temporary sign code update, case number 20-098 ADMC, Administrative Code Amendment. This application is a request for review and a recommendation of approval to City Council for an update to zoning code section 153.150, referencing signs to comply with all requirements of the US and Ohio constitutional statutory, interesting, and case law discussions requiring that sign regulations remain content neutral. Jenny, thank you for joining us this evening. I'll turn time over to you.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. As you stated, this is an updated version of our temporary sign regulations, which we talked about back in August. And the draft before you shows and indicates sort of 5 major changes that I've made based on your comments. So I'm going to go through those really quickly, and then I can answer any questions. And then you would all ask for some additional sort of data information about 2 of the sign types, which I'll share with you here when I'm done. So, and I'm going in the order that it is in the draft, so you can follow along if you want to. So the first piece of this was the clarifications to the sign material standards. So you'll see within the draft that we added language that states that the sign materials should be commensurate with the duration of the sign. So the longer the sign, the more durable the materials need to be. That way we're not penalizing individuals that have signs that will be up for a shorter period of time and
vice versa. We also included within that section that we're ensuring that inspections are happening on a regular basis based on the approval timeframe and the validity timeframe. So that's included in that portion. And then we had some discussion about construction fencing and wanting to make sure that we were putting some parameters around permits being required, as well as the duration of the time frame and location, and limiting illumination for that. So I updated the draft to include that information. Then the third major change, which was actually fairly minor, related to the development period signs. We had some discussion about making sure this was clarified that it's per site. So if you have multiple sites within a development, you're not having multiple signs throughout, that it really is for the whole larger development. And for those, I retained the proposed standards. And again, when I show you the data that we've collected, we can talk that through whether you still think that's relevant, but I didn't, based on that information, feel like it needed to be changed, but obviously up for your direction on that. And then the next big discussion was the non-residential sale leasing period signs. So I just provided, again, some clarity to the different sign types that we had there, as well as then changing the verbiage. I had a wording that was wrong in there. So I updated that and kept the rest the same. And again, I have some general information for you about those sign types. And then the last piece was removing the sandwich board signs altogether. That seemed much consensus from everybody that shouldn't be permitted everywhere. So only in those very urban settings. So those are my changes. Does anybody have any questions about that? Or you want me to go through the numbers really quick and then we can talk it through? Does that sound agreeable?
Let's do public comment if we've had it.
I have not received any, no.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I would appreciate going through the numbers prior
Okay.
to continuing on,
Sure.
looking to the commission. Yep, okay.
Okay. So again, we were looking at the development period sign. So we looked through our totals, which when I was surprised by how few there were. So 13 total, 6 of those, and I asked for a breakdown of single family versus multifamily versus commercial. And then we also had a discussion about urban, and then also how many properties had multiple signs. So again, 13 total that we were able to find that again have approvals. And then 6 of those are single family, 2 are multifamily, and 5 are commercial. Out of all of those, only 1 is within the Bridge Street district. And again, out of all the 13, only 3 of them have 2 signs on 1 parcel. So again, pretty small numbers in terms of how many development period signs we have out there. And again, even smaller numbers of the urban setting as well. And then in terms of the non-residential sale or lease, there are 132 total, with then a majority of those being 32 square feet. So we had a significant discussion last time about the size of those and whether how many signs in existence were of that size. So I provided, or Mike was able to provide that information to me as well. So with that, again, barring your questions, comments, we're asking for a recommendation of approval to City Council. But again, we can talk that through as we get to the end here.
Just one question before we go to commission comments. On the non-residential sale or lease, do you have data on how many of those have multiple signs on a parcel?
I do not. And I think in the end, we were recommending that they only have 1 in our draft anyway. So it doesn't seem like that would be too impactful. But no, I did not ask the question for that particular sign type.
Okay, thank you. All right, looking to the commission, Ms. Fox, I saw your hand go up first.
It's interesting that there are 132, which I'm not really surprised because they're really everywhere. So Franz Road, I knew had at least 14 the last time I looked. So to beta test this language of 100 feet of street frontage for the smaller sign versus over 100 feet for the larger 32 square foot, I kind of used Discovery to kind of measure to see how many parcels would get the larger sign. And literally 100, there's nowhere on Franz Road, hardly anywhere on Franz Road that any commercial property has less than 100 foot of frontage. The only place you really find that is like really in the urban districts or even in the historic district. So my suggestion would be that we increase that to at least 200 foot. I think what we're looking for, if we're going to have that many signs, let's at least reduce the size of them on those smaller lots. That way they still have the possibility of using them, but they don't become such a visual clutter as they are now. I just think that 32 square feet is a pretty good size sign. And we probably don't have too many that have 2 on a partial. We probably just have too many big signs. So I would suggest, under 2 or even 250 or 300. But when I tried to measure up and down Franz Road, the smaller partials, most of them measured over 200 feet. So the really big partials would easily, be able to have the larger sign, but those smaller ones don't really need it, I don't think. So I'd make that suggestion to increase that footage.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Mr. Grimes, do you want to go next? Leo, you turned your video off. Your audio is still muted.
All right, there we go. Some time ago, someone had mentioned that they have a lot of electronic listings out there now, so people really don't need the signage out in front. Is that just a popular thing, or is that something that there should be a reference list on the city's website? Maybe, I don't know how that would be, so that people will say, well, how do I get there? Or is just Googling it the way people do that? Not being one who searched for real estate, I'm just looking for some feedback on that as an alternative of what we're doing here.
Yeah, so I did speak with Colleen Gilger, who's the Director of Economic Development, regarding these particular signs and that comment. And she has indicated that while there is an electronic listing, there is also a need for businesses and property owners to have the ability to have these signs out there. So I think it's sort of having the option in the smaller instances when you're not, maybe you're subleasing a portion of the building, that having that option to have a physical sign on the site is really important to people.
Then I would follow up with asking, is 200 enough? Should it be more? How do all those parcels, in the 132 category fit into that number? How much would we successfully reduce the clutter by making a larger frontage before they could get a larger sign? I don't, that's just an open question. I'm not looking for an answer, but that's my thought, is that I dislike them so much, I want to see even fewer of them. And some of those that last for years, they fall apart before they get rid of them. So at any rate, that's my 2 cents. I would just like to know how that breaks down and whether we should increase it even more. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Schneer, do you want to go next?
Sure. Picking up on the last 2 comments, I can't fall on my sword over whether we should increase the frontage requirement. But if we did, it should be based. There should be some basis for it. 150 is larger than 100. 300 is twice 150. But I'm concerned about just picking a number and saying that's a good number. That ought to suffice. And if there is some basis for it, then I could probably support it. Otherwise, not.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Fishman.
Okay.
You're good.
I'm good. I'm on. Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yep.
I kind of agree with. I do agree with Mr. Schneer, and I think bigger isn't better. I think that there probably signs are necessary. I think most of them are done electronically. I mean, I deal with real estate every day, and most people are going online when they're looking for a property. They're not driving up and down the street. So I think that smaller is better with signs, and I think we should design it so they can be as small as possible. I don't think big is better, there is a lot of clutter. I agree with several people talked ahead of me that you drive up France Road and every shopping center is filled with signs, and it's going to get worse because businesses are changing now. La Scala is going out of business. I can't believe that. And so there'll be a sign there. So I think that I agree with everything that's been said previous to me, and I think that we should look at it very carefully about quality of signs and smaller signs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Ms. Call. I want to pick up on maybe something different and go a bit of a different direction. So if we go back to the purpose statement, and we're talking about the purpose of this subchapter is to protect blah, 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 and the morals and welfare of this community. And so I just want to confirm, Jenny, that there's something in here, if not in this subsection, but in a different section that talks about inappropriate language for sign language in general. Is there anything that protects for swear words or something?
Yeah, let's go back to Thad on that one, because that is a sticky topic. So Thad, over to you.
Well, I think it is probably going to be disappointing to deliver this opinion, but swear language, vulgar language, is protected speech under the First Amendment. It is not considered obscene unless it is actually depicting of sexual activity. And so even something that is of the nature of, F whatever, messages like that have been protected by the Supreme Court and have been protected by the Supreme Court for quite some time. I have, in fact, wrote a white paper on the subject for the Municipal League, which I will share with members of the commission, because that has been a hot topic in our turbulent political times. So we are legally unable to restrict that crude language.
Thank you, Thad. I guess my follow-up question then, so if we go to section 153.55, permanent signs not requiring a permit. So when I look at that, and specifically in section E, residential information signs. So beware of dog, no trespassing. Those are a couple of the examples noted there, Jenny. So a resident could put a sign in their yard along those lines, and language is never, there's no oversight on the language specifically. There would be no oversight because a permit's not required. Is that correct?
In terms of the sign provision, yes. And again, I'll let Thad answer the language.
Okay.
If you're asking that.
Right. The language itself cannot be dictated. And so those are in the nature of illustrations of that particular sign. Even though it does not fall squarely within Reed, because Reed dealt with temporary non-commercial signs, and that section is dealing with permanent signs. It's safe to say that the analysis would be the same in terms of distinguishing based on content or viewpoint.
Okay. I really appreciate that. I walk by a sign with my son every day on the way to school, and it has language that I don't approve of. And I have to explain to him what a word means. So I just wanted to make sure that it is or is not covered here, and it is not. So, but I understand the logic behind it. So thank you for that explanation.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Schneer.
In light of Thad's comments, I didn't actually pick up when I was looking through this, the morality clause, so to speak. I'm not sure that it's, that's a vestige from a prior time, and whether we want to be on record when we are changing things of saying that we have any purpose to regulate the morality of Dublin residents or their signs, because we can't. And, it's been 100 years of Supreme Court cases that have discussed the same issue, as that is pointed out. So I propose that we eliminate any language in the regulations that deal with an attempt to regulate conduct or behavior.
So Thad, looking back to you, I believe the statement that is for discussion is, quote, "The purpose of this subchapter is to protect the general health, safety, morals, and welfare of the community by," and then continuing on. So I know that there is the standard that's protecting the health, safety, and welfare and peaceful enjoyment of living. I know that that's kind of the standard. However, I believe that the comment has been specifically on that word morals. I don't think we have any issue with general health, safety, and welfare.
Correct, and that's a fair point. The morals, that formulation is, as Mr. Schneer indicated, probably a vestige of a time when there was more morality type of legislation permitted, but that has not been the direction that First Amendment jurisprudence particularly has taken. And so it could be removed without substantively affecting the rest of what follows.
Thank you, Thad. All right, back to sign regulation content changes. Questions, comments from the commission? I forget where I was. Mr. Supalak.
Sure, I'll jump in here. I'm actually jumping to, obviously we're in the season of temporary signs, and I'm just jumping to some other sort of recent examples that I've come across in the city that I don't think are putting our best foot forward. And I'm just confirming, I'm staring at it, but I'm just confirming, what is it, section, forgive me, Jenny, section 153158, section O. It's on page 12, looks like. The long and the short of the question is the duration in particular. Right, all of the permitted signs are limited to a period of 4 months. All other temporary permitted signs are limited to a period of 4 months. Is that seems somewhat broad for this category?
So just a clarification question for Jenny. Can you give us examples? Obviously, we're not looking for content, but what types of signs would we see that fall into this category? Of course, Mark touched on it's the season, but are there other signs that you could give us that would fall into this category that may have a different standard?
I know, as you were mentioning that, I was trying to remind myself that. Can you think of an example that this would fall under?
What about things like signs hanging on a clothesline in some, that would be, would that be, is this residential, these temporary signs, does that include residential or just commercial? Or, I guess what I'm saying is, I know that you can't control the content or what someone puts in on their residential private property, but can you control the quantity of them and or the duration of them? Is that what this addresses?
Yes, and that is, so we talk about there being content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions. And so duration would be something that would go to time. The challenge that we run into is that even those content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions in the hierarchy of scrutiny that courts afford to these regulations, content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions still must be narrowly tailored to significant government interests and allow ample alternative avenues for communication, is the phrasing that they use. So 4 months is obviously a durational period. It is not content based, because whether it is somebody delivering a political message or a cultural message, or a Shamrock football player lives here message, it would apply equally. The same would go for number. The same would go for size. They still must be justifiable, though, in terms of our interest as a municipality in protecting the residential character of neighborhoods, avoiding visual clutter, avoiding interference with traffic communication. So we can't. I would say that 4 months in duration, while it seems like a long time, is probably more on the forward edge of durational limitation.
Forward edge meaning on the
aggressive.
And how big it is, or how tight, how short it is?
On how short it is.
Thank you, Fan.
Hey, so if Mark Supalak has a sign in his front yard that says "Home of a Car Athlete," for example, and it's in his yard for the whole year, for example,
I do have that.
Or we have to turn him in, and maybe that's what he's asking.
I think it may get to the point where it's a permanent sign rather than a temporary one, and that's where that might be where some of the lingering signs could be dealt with.
So one question that I have before we proceed on is, we do call out here that other temporary signs, there can only be up to 2 temporary signs on a lot or parcel. But nowhere in there do we differentiate the 5-acre lot or parcel that then, maybe 4 signs would not contribute very much clutter at all because they're on different frontages or whatever else, versus the 0.12 acre lot that has 2, and the next door neighbor has 2, and the next door neighbor has 2. If we're looking at balancing the rights that homeowners have to put signs in their yard regardless of what the content is, but still not encourage the clutter, obviously we can't tell one person that they can have a sign and their next door neighbor can't because you're too close to your neighbor's sign. We don't regulate like that, but I'm just looking for, I don't want to not enforce a rule because that person really shouldn't be subjected to it, even though the law reads the same regardless. Does that make sense?
Yes, it is. It does make a lot of sense, and it's a puzzle. It's something that's still developing because it's hard to, even if we would be making it based upon frontage, for instance, you get a non-commercial temporary sign for every 50 feet of frontage you have, and all of a sudden your speech is being regulated based upon perhaps an economic variable. Perhaps it could be construed as having a disparate impact on certain disfavored groups. So that is why that absolute number has been chosen. Whether 2 is the right absolute number, I don't know. There obviously is a lot of factors that go into it, and it's every quadrennial November creates difficulties and nervousness for municipal lawyers dealing with sign regulations.
Understood.
Extra points for quadrennial. That's great. One clarification amongst us all: temporary signs shouldn't be affixed to trees.
Yep, it's called out in there. It says are not to be affixed to any public utility pole, tree. I just wonder if we need clarification because there are, I don't like the public up front, public utility pole or tree. Well, tree, period.
Yeah, is public modifying both pole and tree? Is that what you're getting?
Yep. So the comma comes to any public utility, comma, pole, comma, tree, etc. But then at the end, what I think is a little ambiguous is at the end of the comma delimited list, we say, and are not located within a public right of way. So we reiterate the public.
It invites ambiguity, certainly. And truth be told, there are case studies in our neighborhoods right now. I'm not sure it's whatever the content is, I'm not sure we want that proliferating across the city. Is all it comes down to. So maybe it's worth clarifying at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak. Ms. Fox, did I see your hand go up?
Yes, I had a question, and maybe I'm missing it. Do we address political signs in here? Am I missing the page? Because if it falls under temporary signs, because Thad mentioned something about November, it seems like political signs should be called out and not limited, because to me that is a right that everybody has. And I walked past a house the other day that had 100 signs in their front yard with a sign that says, take one of these if you support this candidate. And then they were gone the next day. So, I mean, to me, that's if the political signs aren't called out here as an allowed use or duration or whatever, I think we probably should address it.
So Thad, can you speak to Reed when it comes to political signs?
Right. So the political sign call out is not permitted by Reed. I agree that political speech, and the courts have said this, is that political speech is at the highest level of protection. What Reed says is that distinguishing based on content, whether political, directional, which was the matter at issue in Reed, where they had different regulations for temporary directional signs for a church service. And the court wiped out the ability to make those distinctions. So rather than being able to give political signs special treatment over perhaps even better treatment than something like a church, sign, come to St. Andrew's next Sunday type of sign, we can't do that. And so, if anything, we have to treat every non-commercial temporary sign as if it is a political sign. So that's why there's not a call out for political signs in here. They would be among your other temporary signs in that division O.
I understand that. So that's saying then you're only allowed 2, is what you're saying, pretty much.
As this is written, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jenny, is that just a carryover from what it is now, or is that new?
I believe it's a carryover.
Okay.
It's a good question.
2 is probably
Not enough.
I would not vouch for 2 as the right number, and we can provide perhaps I can provide an opinion on that through a written memo that might help think through what the right number would be.
Thank you, Than. One question going back to building lease, non-residential lease or for sale signs. So this one has been hot topic for us the last few weeks, the last few times that we've seen this item. So the one thing that I want to look at, and my brain immediately goes to numbers, that's just where I live. And so if I'm looking at a 32 square foot sign, typically speaking, those are going to be oriented in 4x8 sheets. So it's going to be 8 feet in length because nobody really puts those vertical. They always put them horizontal. So if we're looking at 100 foot of frontage and taking out, usually they're toward the front of the property. So taking out 8 feet, that's what, roughly 8-9% of the frontage. And so I have 2 items for discussion. One is we want to reduce the clutter that is in the city. And really what those signs are appealing to future businesses in the city of Dublin. Those same businesses who are looking to locate here also need sign clutter to be reduced because their building sign, their permanent affixed sign when they locate to the city of Dublin needs to stand out, needs to draw attention to their business. So the first item for discussion is, what is that right? I don't think that 8% of frontage is necessary for an advertisement for sale for lease. Additionally, I don't think that even if you have 100 feet of frontage, that the businesses next to you who are also trying to protect their business interests in the city of Dublin are going to appreciate having 8% of their street frontage, whether it's immediately adjacent to their parcel or not, draw attention away from their own business sign. So looking to the commission for thoughts on, I know we have in there the reduction, I'll have to scroll back, but the reduction to the possible 16, the 4x4 sign, that depending on frontage. But if we can look back to that sign draft, I see the ground mounted signs are limited to 16 square feet in area and 4 feet in height for lots with less than 100 feet of street frontage, 32 for 100 feet or more. I would be looking just at percentages and distances. I would be in favor of going the 16 square feet, thus 4 for 4, up to 200 feet of frontage, and then over 200 feet, or even I could entertain higher, that 32 square feet of signage. Also looking to staff just for a question. In a typical parcel that has 100 foot of frontage, and I know I'm being wildly general here, but in a typical non-residential site that has 100 feet of frontage, where our lot coverage is maybe a 50 or a 60%, what size building and therefore what size permanent sign roughly, and if you don't have the numbers tonight, that's completely acceptable, would we expect to see? What I don't want to do is I don't want to have a larger temporary sign than they would be entitled to business permanent sign.
I don't have exact numbers, but the maximum permitted ground sign would be 50 square feet, and that's not based on the frontage of their site. So either way, 32 would be less than what they would be permitted permanently. But again, your point of if you have 100 feet of frontage, a 50 square foot sign, and then a 32 square foot sign, on top of that, that does take up a lot of their frontage.
And keeping in mind, these are for sale, for lease. So most of the time, these are existing buildings and therefore also have existing signage. So this is additive signage, not in place of signage. So looking back to the commission, just wanted to get opinions. Ms. Fox, let's start with you.
You know, after what Mr. Schneier said about not basing it on length of footage, I think that the intention here is to reduce the amount of visual clutter, but not to reduce the ability for a property owner to lease, you know, or have a for sale sign. So my suggestion would be, no matter what the frontage is, it's the 16 square foot sign, because as you mentioned, Rebecca, there is already a permanent sign on the property. So there is signage that this reduces the clutter, reduces the size, and we don't have to worry about the amount of frontage. So that would be my suggestion. I just go with a smaller size, and hopefully, because we are only allowing them one of three options. If they go with the window, they can't have the one at front or the wall. Before they had them all. So we're reducing it by quite a bit. And I like the small.
So just one question there. I'm looking for your opinion, Ms. Fox. On a parcel that is a larger parcel, so for practical application, let's go to the Cardinal Health campus that's up between 270 and what is that? Perimeter? No, not Perimeter. What is that road? Emerald. So between that sandwiched area, they have two highly visible, and their campus is very, very large. So is the proposal that they would still just be entitled that 16 square foot sign, even though one of their frontages is on 270, where the average speed is somewhere between 55 and 70 miles an hour, and therefore visibility could be argued that it would be less, even though they have two major frontages? I'm just looking to get clarification.
You know, I agree also with Mr. Grimes. I mean, these really large ones are on, or are probably on the commercial sites. I mean, I suppose you could go and break it down, but if you want something simple, you could start here. And if it looked like it was a burden, I suppose you can make adjustments. But that's my preference. I don't think the big 270 signs are the problem. I think it's within the neighborhoods, it's on the arterial streets. That's where we see the majority of these signs.
Thank you for the clarification. Hey, looking to the commission, just thoughts on specifically the non-residential for sale for lease signs. Mr. Schneier.
I like Ms. Fox's suggestion, and I would be supportive of that.
Thank you, Mr. Schneier. Mr. Fishman? You're muted.
I agree. I like the 16 foot sign. I don't think that, not to belabor this, I don't think somebody looking for a space in Cardinal Health is going to drive down the street to see if they have a sign up. I think they're going to look online. And I think a small sign, 16-foot sign, no matter what the frontage is adequate. And I agree with what Jane said. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
A ditto to that.
Okay. Mr. Supelak, Mr. Grimes, thoughts?
I'm good with smaller. On this one.
Okay. Mr. Grimes?
Well, anything we can make them less visible, less clutter, and the length of time we have to look at what we do permit. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. So it looks like we have consensus down, removing the 32 square foot in area. Okay. Are there any other call outs, questions, items for discussion on the sign code? I believe we have one, I'll come right back to you, Ms. Fox. I believe we have one outstanding item that staff is going to get back to us, that's specifically on the count of signs on residential property that are those temporary signs. Are there any other items that we need staff direction or that we need clarity on from a commission perspective? Ms. Fox, let's go to your question.
Just one, and it's really a small one, but I had to kind of smile. It's on the first page under 153.151, how you pay your fees by cash, check, order. And I'm thinking to myself, pretty soon there won't be any cash, check, or money orders, and then no one will be able to pay anybody. So I'm thinking maybe you could just take out how you pay.
I would agree with that. And then I did neglect to mention the deletion of the word moral in the first paragraph. So Ms. Kennedy, did you have another item?
That's it, Ms. Call.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Any further discussion from the commission? Staff, have you received everything that you need directional wise?
Yeah, so I guess I'll request maybe that you table this then. That way Thad can bring back the information about the other signs. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, and then I'll make these other changes and we'll bring that back at a future meeting for your recommendation.
Thank you. Okay, looking for a motion to table.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Ms. Steele?
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Schneier,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beal. All right, moving on, we have informal discussions. The next one up is residential development standards. This is for discussion only. This is a continuation of the informal discussion regarding recent trends in residential developments pertaining to lot sizes, side yard setbacks, lot coverage, and density. So Claudia, hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. We wanted to kind of continue this discussion that we had in August, and frankly, staff had a heck of a time finding pattern books or development standards for neighboring communities. They must not put them up as much as we do on the website, or even regional communities. So we thought maybe after we had that informal review last week, or 2 weeks ago, I should say, which we can't talk about because it is an active case, maybe focus a little bit more on the city of Dublin and the area that really ultimately would be coming before the commission is very limited in terms of north of 33. So what we wanted to share with you is this map. And that really is what we refer to as the Southwest area. And that area in particular is really the last of where residential development is contemplated in the community plan. And as you can see, there is lots and lots and lots of vacancy. We do have probably weekly, bi-weekly inquiries in what developments would be acceptable within this area. And we included in your packet the community plan for the Southwest area pages, as well as then you can see also the future land uses within this area. Development here is difficult at the moment because there are plans for in the future Tuttle Crossing Boulevard to bisect this area east-west, so north and south, I guess I should say. So the Tuttle Crossing Boulevard will go to the west. It is not programmed in the CIP currently. It was programmed to go to Avery, and then funds were diverted to 33 Post Road interchange in that area. But that makes development tough because you do see all these large parcels, but all of those would be cut in half. And then the other obstacle here is really utilities, and that's something where a 20-acre parcel or a 30-acre parcel that a developer might have their eye on, financially, it's not feasible at all to get utilities to this area, and we would expect really it would take a master developer to propose something that would potentially make some financial sense, which is what happened with Ballantrae. So that was an effort that the city also assisted with, as we ended up being the owner of the Golf Club of Dublin. But that was a master developed community with the assistance of the city. But at this point in time, really there is no active proposal other than the one that we had looked at a couple weeks ago. Not for applicants not trying. We do have one that is trying to put something together. We have yet to see something, and once they do their infrastructure analysis, usually we don't hear from them again. But in our special area plan for the Southwest area, you can sort of see that there are, especially in the outskirts of this particular area, the densities are fairly low. So they're in the 1.5 units to the acre. That's really on the west side where the city annexation stops. And then in the center of the area where Cosgray and Rings come together, and that's really what currently is Amlin. There is some ideas for, or in the community plan, some projections that there could be another type of little town center occurring with higher densities surrounding it. So the brownish colors are densities that are up to 5 units to the acre. And a couple of the developers that have approached us have kind of glommed onto those numbers. And empty nester is always the word, high-end empty nester. And again, we have yet to see one come close to even filing for an informal or going beyond the infrastructure stage. But we kind of wanted to show you that this area in particular is the one that we think is going to have the most development pressures here in the future, especially if they found somebody that would be coming together with several developers and make this happen. And that's really where we wanted some more feedback from you all in terms of, as the community plan is getting updated here in the next couple of years, what does this make sense? What kind of development would we see? Is a one-story cluster ranch okay? We've had some discussions about numbers, obviously, in terms of setbacks, which was very helpful. But we were charged, and the commission was charged with providing council with guidance or suggestions as to how to address some of the concerns that have been raised by them. And within the city of Dublin, really those concerns would have to be addressed within this particular area. And so that's really where we are. We wanted to have a little bit more discussion and direction from you all on the preferred residential development patterns and what kind of strategies we could employ to make those happen, whether it's in the community plan addressed or whether it's within the PUD standards that we could update and include more rules. And then what else would you need to answer question 1? And then anything else you want to discuss with us.
Thank you, Connie. So looking to the commission now, back at what seems like. So looking to the commission for questions for Claudia, concentrating, of course, our discussion on the 3 questions that Claudia just had on the screen. I am referencing back to the public comment we received a few weeks ago on the please don't just listen. And I believe that the commission has proven in the past that we go in with the best interests of the residents in mind, while still weighing the opportunity for these future development items. So does someone want to kick off with questions or comments, feedback for Ms. Kennedy?
Well, I'll go.
Oh.
In that southwest area, that plan that is before us, how old is that?
Jenny, help me out here. This was in the 07 plan and then didn't change in the 13 update. Am I correct in that?
Yep.
Yeah, so in the 2007 community plan, which was a huge undertaking that took 3 years, it was a complete overhaul of the community plan that was in place before 2007. In 13, we did more of a mini overhaul, focusing on certain areas in the city and updated certain area plans that were more pressing. So this one is not been changed since 07.
And that goes also to probably the fact that the costs of putting in the infrastructure make much of anything along these lines too big a challenge.
It is that, and it's also, I forgot to mention that the railroad goes through that there on the diagonal, and going over or going under is something that the city would have to do with Tuttle Crossing. That would really be the only connection that would get from the one side of the railroad to the other. And that cost obviously is astronomical and has not been decided which way to go. So that's the other issue with the land that is across the railroad on the west.
Well, it would seem to me that that community around Amlin that's presents opportunities to develop another sub area other than just calling it the southwest area to make it more attractive and maybe act as a catalyst if further support for the infrastructure is needed by way of annexation to a little bit larger area there in order to support the utilities and infrastructure. I like the idea of the way they put the main road up through there. That's rather creative. I like that. And it's always been mentioned that you're looking for areas to put density in and maybe to be able to have more affordable density. And maybe this is an area that those kind of opportunities would present itself. And also by having the higher density, better support the infrastructure that's needed. I don't know if those are the kind of things that you think about when you're going into this next plan, but
yeah,
those are the things that are coming to my mind that we need to look at this sub area as an opportunity and how do we get there? And I can only imagine how much an underpass on that railroad is going to cost. I mean, is it in the $25 million range?
Oh, I wouldn't know.
I mean, well, we're finished building one bridge. We can always, now it's the next one. A little joke there, but yeah, I can only imagine because that's a double track, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's very busy.
Very heavy, yeah. So, but if you want to this opportunity, that the cost of doing that might have to be weighed and evaluated in light of this whole project. And maybe there's already been studies done, but I think that those are some of the issues. How do you give a full opinion when you're not looking at what the cost, the benefits? I mean, we're and also, as you mentioned, the standards of the surrounding communities that are not currently in the city. What do they want to do? How will it be compatible? How can we be compatible with them? How can we try to flow from one community to the next? Those are important questions.
Definitely. And the engineering staff had been advancing plans for Tuttle Crossing to at least get extended from where it ends now at Wilcox to Avery. And even we had some funding from MORPC, and even with that, there was still at the end I think it was $7 million of a funding gap that we did have. So these road projects are very, very, very costly, especially something like Tuttle Crossing, which would have an Emerald Parkway type feel. But in the end, it seemed as though that the West Innovation District, OSU, all those influences made that project up there of higher priority. So those funds were shifted.
So Claudia, could I have you go back to the slide with the areas of concentration for questions and conversation, just to make sure that we're focused moving?
Yep.
Thank you. So I think that the discussion is a very, very good discussion. I do want to make sure that we're looking at this in context and focusing based on the residential development standards, and not, while yes, we want to keep in mind where those development standards would apply, understanding that there are some areas of the city that could fall under redevelopment. So if we could go back to the slide with multiple questions, looks like we're still looking at the map. There we are. So preferred residential development pattern strategies, identify additional material and or history needed for the discussion, and other comments by the commission. So Ms. Kennedy, I know you had your hand up.
Thanks, Ms. Call. I think I wanted to drill down a little bit on item number 2, Claudia, specifically additional materials or history needed. And I think I've mentioned this in previous meetings, and I've asked the question, and I think the answer is no, but is there any kind of voice of the customer or voice of Dublin that we have? And if the answer is no, and I think it is there anything that we could try to do to survey the residents of Dublin in some way, some small subset or cross-section, to collect preferences or feedback or opinions to help fuel this conversation? I think that could be a helpful piece of information if it exists, or if it was something we could get easily.
Would you, I'm sorry, would you think a certain demographic, like age is what I'm asking, or more of a cross-section of different neighborhoods, people in traditional neighborhoods, people in retirement neighborhoods or empty nester neighborhoods? What are your thoughts on that?
I think a cross-section is important. It seems like all we've talked about in recent times is retirement communities or empty nester communities. I'd love to hear what the voice of 20-somethings think, or do they have places to live? Are they looking for more permanent or next step residencies? I don't know. Being in the space that I am, it's hard for me to understand those other mindsets sometimes. So that might help, I think, some of us come out of our minds a little bit and understand those needs. But I'm certainly open to feedback from the rest of the commission. And then Claudia, maybe there are ways to share case studies from other communities, maybe that are similar to Dublin, that have had these last few parcels of land available, and what's been done, and can we look back and see a reflection on, was that a good direction? Okay. I don't know. Or is there something else we can look to from a benchmarking perspective? I don't have the answer, but I think some of that data would help me understand the situation better.
Next up, Mr. Fishman, do you want to go next?
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
You are unmuted, but your video is off, or you're just really, really dark.
No, the video is off. I think I'm being blocked by the thing in the middle or something.
See Mr. Fishman. Good.
Yeah, Warren, I can see you too.
I can't see him. That's odd.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, Warren.
Okay, you can hear me now, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I of course, being so old, I was in on early discussions on the piece of the land around the railroad tracks in Amlin. I don't think we're talking specifically about that, but I think that we shouldn't be in a rush to accept any deals or develop just to be developing. I think Christina's suggestion was pretty good about seeing what people want, but I think we want to maintain the character of Dublin, and I think I think we should wait for the right thing to come along. Who knows? That area across the railroad track could be another hospital, or it could be rezoned to something completely different that we haven't even thought of yet. And maybe that if that thing is a hospital or something, the funds would be there to get us across the railroad track. That's always been in discussion. I remember in those discussions that Amlin was very specific about maintaining their little town of Amlin, the people that live there, and making sure there was really super high quality development around their little town. So as far as the other areas near Tuttle and so on, I think that we have to make sure that we don't make that area a dumping ground and just put any kind of high density development there. I think we hear that about east of the river. We hear about it down by Tuttle. I think it's important to maintain the standards. I am for density like anybody else. In reading our thing today, the builders are telling us there's a big demand for high density housing and so on. I think we, as Jane points out, we can do wonderful high density housing with the proper amount of, without lowering the density of the parcel, and having quality usable green space around them to keep Dublin green. And we don't have to follow everybody's try. If there's a demand for high density housing, I'm for it. I read my thing today, and I thought it was interesting. They said that people in HOAs don't want to have, or people don't want to have to support that extra property themselves. They'd rather have an HOA do it, or the city. And I think that could be a valid point. But I think we want to make sure we keep the standards high, the quality of the buildings high, and as Jane always points out, the layout, so that there's plenty of green space, but usable green space in those high density developments. So that's all I have now. But I think that the other thing is, I don't think we should be in a rush to cross the railroad track. I think we should wait for the right thing to come along, and it could be something we can't even imagine now, because years ago we had those discussions, and kind of what the people in Amlin and the people in that area were very, very, very adamant about, that they wanted something super quality around them. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Grimes, do you want to go next? Oh, I forgot that you went first, but if you have any follow-up questions, otherwise we'll move on to Mr. Schneer.
Keep on going.
Thank you. Mr. Schneer, you're up.
I guess I can't help but take a big step back and think of this in a different way, and maybe a little heretical. For some reason, I keep thinking of Muirfield and the development, in the early 70s. Why not be less prescriptive about this? And this is, it's getting to Warren's point, but in a different way. Rather than try to force a particular outcome, let it evolve. We always have the ability to tailor it, and as ideas come to fruition. But as Claudia said, this is a tough one, and I'd be concerned that we say this is what we want, and nobody is interested, as opposed to just flipping the script and not being that definitive. And let's see what comes up. Maybe it's a hospital, maybe it's a very unique use that does not exist in Dublin that we couldn't foresee necessarily. But wow, it's amazing when we see it. And I know, I can't identify it, but I keep going back. Think of our predecessors. It wasn't a commission; it was basically township trustees and a city council. When Nicholas and the others came up with with the concept for Muirfield. So I just sort of would like to personally sort of lean not lean in, but lean out, and let's see where this all takes us.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Supalak?
Claudia, I might rewind as well, not wholly unlike Mr. Schneer, but maybe a little bit differently. And I think y'all are being asked or charged with a question here. We're sort of dancing around it, but I guess maybe I was mentally unpacking it a little bit differently. I'm going back to your map of the remaining residential, right? Which is in large part a map of Dublin, and a lot of it is light yellow. There's very little of it actually that is the bright yellow. This one pocket way down there in the southwest, that is the big bright pocket of this residential, right? And then the question is, as we continue to develop it, should we consider rethinking how we approach residential? If that's the question, I'm going to say of my own volition, and Warren kind of touched on this too. He said maintain the character of Dublin, right? So Dublin is largely residential. It has some pockets with some other, commercial uses. It has some pockets where we've considered and put in these exception communities that are this denser empty nest thing. I think there's a certain amount of, I think we'd all the commissioners would head nod with me that there is merit to some of that. There is merit to those pockets of higher density. The question is how frequent, how large, you know what I mean? Is the product that they are giving us, if we're going to provide that exception, is the product they're giving us acceptable as an acceptable complement to the rest of the city? But really, I think, like Warren said, we want to maintain the character of Dublin, right? And so my gut is saying to me, there's a lot of good in this conceptual plan as it's drawn. We hear you loud and clear on it'll take some doing. It'll take some doing to get utilities out there. It'll take some doing to get the infrastructure built. It'll take some doing to get across that train track. Nobody's really chomping at the bit to make that all happen because the cost of entry is kind of cumbersome. But if what you were asking as you have those conversations, should this be residential comparable to the rest of the city, i.e. residential that exists within the core residential code? I would say yes. I would say, I personally would say that doesn't preclude there from being pockets in this that make sense of, some of the empty nester communities at a limited scale, right? That complement the core residential nature of Dublin, but the core residential nature of Dublin is these suburban lots built via the code, right? The standard code. So I don't know if that's sort of the answer you all are looking for, but that's the answer I'm inclined to give. I can appreciate the merit on this this conceptual drawing to consider sort of a small neighborhood commercial center. I think those are always done well. They are always fruitful, right? But that said, the lion's share of this lion's share of this bright yellow swath that's way down in the southwestern district, I would advocate for make it comparable to the rest of the city, make it comparable to the residential suburban neighborhoods that are developed under the code. It should not all be a more urban development. I'm sorry. It should not scratch that. It should not all be a more dense empty nester development left to right, top to bottom. It should be, those things should be complementary, is what my gut reaction tells me at present.
And you're speaking exactly to even in 2007, when the plan was adopted, those conversations were had with the Planning Commission then and with City Council then, where we already were aware that Columbus was planning and zoning and preparing for high density, traditional neighborhood, alley loaded, dense lots within that area. And it was deliberately decided that that it would stop where Columbus stopped, and that the city would have heavy buffering along that border, and that the rural character would be prevalent in that area to set the city apart from what was happening in Columbus to the south, which obviously, as you all, I'm sure, have traveled down that area, have seen what that character is. It's a nice character, maybe not in this particular area of Dublin.
Ms. Fox, let's go on to you.
It's really been interesting to hear everybody's perceptions. I sit back and I say to myself, as I looked at this today, I think a couple of things. We have to broaden the picture. This is a huge swath of land that needs to be developed, but I honestly think, and maybe because I see what's happening along the 33 corridor, I think there's annexation possibilities. I think the University Boulevard area is going to be developed. I think there'll be residential within it. I think the area around OU is going to develop. I think there's infill things like we've seen that happened up along Highland Croy. I think we're always going to be dealing with the needs of the developer versus what we think the community wants. So a couple of things I want to bring up. I think it's been a consistent message from this community that they want aesthetically pleasing neighborhoods. They want us to meet their housing needs. They want something that will increase their property values and not decrease them. They want the natural environment. They want a sense of community, and they want a quality of life. And I think if we start with that tenet and how we allow these developments to come to us and then to be built, if we can meet those things, we can drill down on what that looks like. But I think as Lance said, sometimes I think we worry so much about footprint, setbacks, and height that we miss the forest for the trees. And I think what we want to do is we want to come up with design development patterns that meet that intent, which is some of the most beautiful communities possible. If we would have worried about the setback and the height and the footprint in Muirfield, we wouldn't have gotten Muirfield. We wouldn't have got all that beautiful landscape, the bike paths, because connectivity and the natural landscape is what created the community that it is. So I would say that, first of all, we don't want to go out and copy bad patterns. We want to create our own development patterns that actually are cutting edge, attractive to the point that they have a timelessness, that other communities copy us, because we've actually thought about what we want the end product to look like. But first and foremost, I don't think we've identified what we really need in this city. I personally, as a council member, don't even know what our housing needs are. I do not know. We need to look at the demographics. We need to take a look to see, well, how many empty nester homes do we need? How many single families do we need? How many multifamilies do we need? Because we probably need some. We always say no multifamilies, but we have a lot of career people. Many of our own employees can't afford to live in the city of Dublin. So I think we need to study a little bit about what our needs are, what our demographics are, and what our needs are, and collect a little bit of that. But not just data. I think we need to actually talk to people and find out what they want. I think that was a good comment made by Christina, because I think we actually should bring some people in. Empty nesters, I went out after our conversation about bringing in people and asking them what they want in these empty nesters communities. So I'm a empty nester age group, way above it. But so I asked some of my friends, and many of them said that I moved to that community of really tight housing and very little yard because I really love the community center and the swimming pool that they had, and being able to go down there and have a glass of wine with someone I just met, because now I have a sense of community. So there are attributes to these developments that actually improve quality of life. And I think that's a focus that we need to pay attention to. It's not the building itself that makes the people happy. It's the environment around the building that creates social connection. And I think that we don't pay enough attention to that. So not only don't we know what's in our own housing stock right now or what we need, I don't even know in our land use what percentages is commercial. There used to be, apparently, and Claudia, you can correct me, there used to be someone told me that it was supposed to be 60% residential and 40% commercial. That was the balance that they were striving for. I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea what our balance is, or if we have a balance, or if we're striving for a balance. So how do you create a development pattern if you don't know what you need or what you want? And I think that we also probably should identify the possibilities of future land opportunities. If we I mean, the whole west side of our city is wide open farmland. I don't know if we'll annex any of that, or anybody will want to be annexed into us, but what do those development patterns look like? I also think it might be interesting to take a look. There's a great book, I was just telling Jenny about it, and and I'd love for you guys to maybe look it up. It's called Pocket Neighborhoods. You probably can't see it in this tiny little thing, but it's called Pocket Neighborhoods. It's by Ross Chapin. In Seattle, they're creating high density neighborhoods, but they kind of look like old fashioned neighborhoods. Everything is interior, social green spaces, very much like what we're talking about, that creates connectivity within the neighborhood itself, and then also out to the broader community. I think that there are some trends out here that we might be able to research a little bit, not only within the United States, but maybe within international, in other countries where you find that the living is so delightful within their community that maybe we haven't hit on the right kind of development pattern. Maybe we're so stuck on the suburban footprint that we're so used to with cul-de-sacs and that sort of thing, or urban, that those are the only two things that we consider. But there's a whole lot more out there. As Lance said, I think we should allow creativity to happen, but we should maybe create a holistic, intentional standard of what this neighborhood should give us in the way of a living environment. So, I mean, that's maybe a little too high level. I don't know, but I just don't think you can build it by saying it's this setback or this density. I think you have to create a vision of the most beautiful environment you can think of, and then try to design some sort of way to encourage a developer to, and once you do that, what they love is certainty and predictability and speed and no arguments. So if you lay that out for them, then they're going to say, okay, we know what they want, and we're going to build to that. And I just think you'll create a community that everybody will want to live in. So I'll stop now, because I'm sorry, that was my soapbox. I'm sorry, but that's my soapbox.
No, I love your soapbox. Things, if I may I?
Go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that council asked us, I feel like, was the minutia of setbacks on lot coverage and density. I think that was the question we were asked. I, as a planner, love obviously that we are going way beyond this and are having these discussions about what is right for the community at a larger scale. Jane, a lot of the items that you mentioned in terms of what do we need, what do we have, what do we want, will all be studied ad nauseum as part of the 2035 plan. There's always going to be a baseline study done, and then how many housing units we have of this kind, and then what are demographic trends that are coming this way, and where are they settling, and what kind of people are they? Are they the workforce? Are they still families, which is, our bread and butter? Or the trend obviously is also very heavily towards seniors. So I would say all of the things that you had mentioned that you want answers to, or that we need to answer, will be part of the 2035 plan. And that's going to be a long process, but it's going to be a really fun process, because we're going to dig in and we're going to talk to neighborhoods and people and have people help us out with studies and data and analysis. So it's coming.
Right. And
Thank you, Claudia.
If it's just about answering the setbacks and the footprint, I suppose that's really easy, because we are all talking about we want reduced density. But if we're going to give any kind of variance to the density, then I guess I would love the discussion of what's the trade-off. What do you get in return? Is it the developer that's pushing the vision, or is it the city that's pushing the vision? Because they come in and ask for these things, but unless we know what we want in return for that, I don't think you should give the variance. And I just don't think, because we've given it in the past, it's good enough to give it in the future, personally. But without a decent quality of life trade-off for the community that they want to create.
I'm going to piggyback.
So I'll piggyback on Jane's comments here. So listening to the rest of the commission, I align with pretty much all of your thoughts. I love the comments, and I also jotted down the maintain the character of Dublin comment earlier. But I look at one of the approaches that staff does an excellent job with is when businesses come in, and I'm speaking specifically about businesses, when businesses come in, our immediate response to businesses is, we want your A game. I don't think we necessarily do the same for residential developers. I think they come in and they say, hey, we want to build. How many times recently have we seen the empty nester properties? We've seen the single family homes that have the minimum setbacks, that have the maximum lot coverage, that claim that this is what the market is driving. I think Christina hit on it with the conversations. But I think I would go at a little bit different goal for having those conversations with residents. We have a lot of people who are and have been here for decades, but we also have a lot of people who are recent transplants to Dublin. How easy was it to find a property that met your desires, your needs? For us, we ended up buying a condo in the city and living in a condo for 6 months while we continued to shop for a house, because the market was so sparse with what we were looking for. And so having those conversations with residents who came here to say, how hard was it to come? Did we meet your needs? Was there a property type that you were looking for that you couldn't get and therefore had to settle? But specifically when we're looking at development for future development, as we're looking at this map on here, having that attitude of, we need your A game. And if that is high density residential and there is no flair, no flavor, it doesn't match the character of Dublin. If there is something that is a master community that has high density in the center, that has a community center, that has feathering, that has great open space and walking paths and everything that we know to be the character of Dublin, then yes, we'll entertain that. To a couple of commission members' points, there could be something out there that we couldn't imagine. If there were a university complex or a type of amphitheater program or anything, I mean, we don't want to restrict and say, this is exactly what we want in this location. We want it high quality single family homes that have larger lots, that have usable open space. We could dictate that, but would we be losing opportunity because we are restricting the vision so much. So I think that having that bring your A game mentality is really a nice springboard location, understanding that there is a barrier to entry here. We're talking a very unique parcel. In my previous life, we dealt with incredibly unique parcels that had to go around lakes, over rivers, and get water that didn't exist on the other side. And so while, yes, it's costly, Warren hit on it, we don't need to be in a hurry. We're looking for the right fit for Dublin, for existing Dublin and for future Dublin, to maintain what the character of Dublin is, who we are. So Mr. Supalak, did I hear your voice? I didn't see, but did I hear your voice for a piggyback comment?
I was going to piggyback on Jane. I forget why I was doing so. Forgive me. I was going to say let's agree, this conversation we're having in a variety of different ways, even the empty nester conversation and everything Jane touched on, there are whole cities in Phoenix and Arizona that are built exactly the way she described, with the intent of providing those amenities, right? So like there's a lot of, for retirement communities, there's a lot on this, around this, that says exactly what she's saying. It's not just the houses. It's got to be more. And I agree with you, Rebecca. And maybe that's what I was saying, Claudia. Short of knowing otherwise, if we're going to approach this, I don't know that we need to prescribe anything as much as saying it's going to be, we know it's kind of mostly residential and it's going to be therein, it's falling under our code. But if you want an exception to it, right, it's everything we're saying about these small pocket communities. If we're going to grant an exception for it, sell us, make it great, bring your A game. I like the way you were going on that, Rebecca. Kudos.
So staff, looking back to you, I know you were looking for specific questions to be answered. We were concentrating on the southwest area of the city. Are you looking for direction? Claudia, you mentioned council's challenge to understand lot coverage and setbacks and the minutia of the code. Are you looking for some details not specific to the special area where we could have some flexibility in development? I know we've seen smaller parcels come up for development recently, and it seems like we're getting the postage stamp, hey, it's going to sell the empty nesters and we want maximum lot coverage, no green space, that sort of thing.
I think the conversation that we had regarding the Ayrshire application did shed some light on some of the things that you're looking for that we could put into a memo to council, and the conversation tonight as well. And we'll go from there. I mean, some of the stuff we're going to have to punt to the 2035 plan, which will kick off next year. Which is not too far away, actually. And council's having a retreat for that topic specifically here in the near future. So yeah, I think we can go from there. And in the meantime, we'll also put our heads together and come up with some questions and potentially start reaching out to some HOA reps and people that we've been in contact with on other development infills that we know, and then we'll try to find some younger folks.
Thank you, Claudia. All right. If no objections from the commission, I will conclude our item 3 for the informal discussion and move on to item number 4, Specialty Hospitals Code Update. Again, this is administrative discussion only item, informal discussion regarding recent trends in medical care facilities and how to best address the uses in the zoning code. Jenny, back to you for this one.
Thank you. Yeah, as you mentioned, we just need some feedback on the next 2 topics, and we did a combined memo. We'll start with the specialty hospital use, and then we'll go into the Bridge Street AFDP, and I'll maybe have Claudia help chime in on that too. But with regard to the specialty hospital facilities, I think as I mentioned in the memo, we've had, there's been a lot of changes obviously in healthcare and how that's provided in the city. And the provision of resources, is what we were sort of classifying as a specialty nature, are, different than a typical hospital use. And we wanted to understand from the commission's perspective, as we look at a potential code amendment, to help to put parameters around this and define what the direction should be, what district should it be in, what are there use specific standards that we should be looking at. We wanted to get your input before we bring that forward. Again, knowing that these are really important resources to have within the community and wanting to make sure that they're permitted in some way and location, but then also making sure that they're sensitively located and we're accounting for all the factors that we should be, such as, parking, proximity to other uses, traffic generation, site modifications, whether they need fencing, what the review requirement should be for that. So again, just looking to you all for your initial feedback on whether you, I guess, first of all, think this is something we should tackle. And if so, then what sort of parameters should we be looking at and trying to incorporate as we go forward? I'm happy to answer any more questions about that.
Thank you, Jenny. Mr. Grimes, do you want to start us off?
I don't think I can get used to this website. It was mentioned earlier, concern about how there's too many of this type applying, and you're worried about having too many in the city. Is that, and it's not fitting into a lot of the areas of the city? That's the concern?
It's not the number. It is really just, again, if you're thinking of an inpatient facility, potentially, if we would classify that under hospital, there is potential for that to be located within close proximity to residential uses. And again, just wanting to make sure that we're accounting for, whether there should be some distance requirements or site considerations. So it's not necessarily the number of them. It's just as we sort of parse this out and look at this use versus a hospital use versus a medical use, because it's sort of a long-term stay that people would have. So it's not the quicker turnover of a hospital, and it's not a medical office use. It's sort of its own kind of animal. So just trying to understand what your concerns or thoughts might be around that.
Well, I think if somebody is going to put together the capital needed to staff and access something like this, a resource like this in a community, I don't, that's a that's a good thing that they want to locate these kind of facilities in your area. And the closer that they come to where the people live is usually the best and most accessible. That's why they want them out in the communities. And instead of going to the hospital, whether it's here in town or any of the other hospitals in the region, if you can go close to home, your family can support you. And I think this is a good thing that you want to accommodate in our community. And what you need to do is figure out how to fit it in, or make an exception, or provide a rule or method to make it easier for them to be able to be in the community. And I think we are able to take a lot of different types of businesses and fit them into the fabric of a smaller hub area or sub area, and make it all work. And I think this is not that large of a facility, but can potentially provide a very good service close to where the people live. So that's what I say.
Mr. Fishman, do you want to go next? You're still muted. Still muted.
How am I now?
You're good.
Okay. It's great. When I read this earlier, the first thing that popped in my mind is the changing uses, and I think we're going to see a lot of office buildings that become vacant, I was talking to somebody recently. He said, "Oh, don't worry about this building if you buy it because it's a medical building." And we'll always have use for medical use. It's being converted to a medical building. So I think, again, we kind of have to wait and see what happens, who approaches us. I mean, if another Dublin Methodist comes, obviously they can't go into an office building. But if the kind of medical centers that we were talking about, small offices, small emergency centers and outpatient centers and so on, I think that they'll be coming to us, and I think there'll be a lot of conversions from retail space and office buildings. So I think we have to be. We've done. I think that the previous councils and boards have done a great job in getting quality and aesthetics along with incredible facilities. So I think that I think they'll fit in different places, as Leo said, that we'll need them in different places. But there's Dublin is not is big, but not that big, where we've got office buildings scattered through town and shopping centers that the uses could change. So I think that we talked about the approach of them coming to us. I think we have to, when they do, we have to look at it and we have to be prepared. We've got ordinances and zoning in place right now that control what they look like and parking and access and all that other stuff. So I think that we just have to be patient.
So I do want to make sure that we have clarity in what you're looking for, Jenny. So specialty hospitals is somewhat a broad term. As we look at the code right now, hospital is somewhat broad. And so where we have hospital parking regulations, let's say, and it's designed for a traditional hospital where there are patients who stay at the hospital, they may need additional parking spaces because they have visitors or that sort of thing. And then there are very different uses. There are the specialty hospitals where it's a physical therapy type environment, but it's more aggressive. And so maybe it's a, rehabilitation hospital. But then there are also mental health facilities and substance abuse facilities that all have different requirements. And maybe we ought to look at where the regulation and what zones those fall into, because we could have different considerations depending on the use. So I just want to make sure as we're going through commission discussion that we're taking that broad approach and really focusing on what specialty hospitals are defined as, because it may tailor some of the requests that we have from a commission for staff. So Mr. Fishman, going back to you.
Yeah, again, well said twice tonight. That's really what I was thinking, that there's all these different uses. And I think we have to have codes in place, of course, for all those different uses. But I think that we're going to have them, and I think there's going to be space for them because I think there's going to be a lot of conversions. So I think that Claudia, I guess, has to get busy and make sure we have the codes and the restrictions so that they can meet all the needs as far as aesthetics, parking, all those other things. But I think we're going to get those. Uses change. Not to fall back on our previous discussion about residential and commercial. I got a call real quickly from Florida the other day, and because last year we were looking for a place in Florida, and I was thinking about a condo, and the lady said, "Oh, condos are really getting cheap now here in Florida because people are now looking for single-family houses versus the high-rise condos." So I think we've talked about it earlier today, but I think we've got to be open, and I think there are going to be uses. You said it really well about mental health centers and drug rehabilitation, and they all have different uses, different parking requirements. And so I think that Claudia's got her work cut out for her.
Thank you, Warren. Mr. Supalak, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think we're running at this all sort of the same way. There's a certain amount of, how about this? We generally agree, Jenny, if the question here is, should we have a specialty, a special use case for a specialty hospital? I think we agree. We've run into it a couple times. We should figure this out and add it to the code so we don't have to try and bucket it into things, right? It doesn't fit into round peg, square hole type of thing, right? So we should write this version of it. Yes, we can align on that. And then I think we're probably, you guys certainly know what you're doing. So we're probably just sort of telling you what you already know, in that, yeah, there's some discovery work to do. Make the list of what are the specialty hospitals out there in the world and how do they each behave, because they will all, to everything everyone's touching on, they will all behave differently. And some of those behaviors, i.e., the rehab center needs more parking per bed, the physical therapy needs less parking per bed. Like we're going to start to zhuzh out some of those things, and or will there be other ones? Will there, Jane will appreciate this, will some of them have outdoor functional, like a lot of times in the programming of the architecture, will they have outdoor space that's useful for one reason or another? Will they need fences to enclose people? Will they need those types of things? What are the common sort of behaviors of some of these facilities? And then suddenly those behaviors, I think, start to tell us, well, boy, they're going to have an ambulance every day and it's going to come blaring in here with a siren. That tells us, that function we need to think through a little closer to the hospital than, say, a medical office building right up the street. So each of those will sort of get an assessment, and that will start to help you guys build the code appropriately for some of them. And we may discern that a standard umbrella, I don't think we need to unpack this too deep, but we may discern via that a standard umbrella on the specialty hospital works. We may discern that, boy, we're going to need 3 of these for X, Y, and Z as they become more aggressive in one form or another. Again, not saying anything I don't think you guys know, just sort of reiterating it. A lot of the stuff will start to come to fruition about, what should the standards be around these behaviors.
Thank you, Mr. Supalak. Ms. Fox?
I know what some of the problems have been in the past, as I've seen some things with neighbors complaining that healthcare facilities want to come into residential areas and they worry about it being a 24-hour thing or the wrong kind of specialty healthcare service within a neighborhood. So I think first and foremost, and I did forward all of you, Pompano Beach went through this because their problem was they had a lot of shopping centers that were vacant, and healthcare services started to move in, and there was no zoning regulation, and it was all kinds, in all the wrong places. So they did a little study on it, and I think first and foremost, we have to broaden our definition of hospital in our zoning code. It's just too vague. So hospitals are allowed in all kinds of places, and in the end, that hospital, because it's not defined, could end up right next door to you in your backyard, and it might be the all wrong thing, right? So I think it's important to look at all the different kind of specialty hospital facilities, define them, and as Mark said, some are 24 hours. They're open all night, and some aren't, and some are 7 to 7, and they only have a few cars. But I think you have to start looking at what the impact to the community is on each of those. And then you have to decide where different specialty hospitals or specialty medical facilities are appropriate. And if you do have them, like on Franz Road, they may back up to Llewellyn Farms or in some other areas. You have to say, okay, what's the distance a hospital of any kind is from the neighborhood? And I think if you start there, and I think there's some pretty good beef in that particular one that I sent. It's a good starting point, but I think we just first and foremost have to define each one of them, and then I think it's easier to decide where they go.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Ms. Kennedy?
Ms. Call, I'm going to just go ahead for the interest of time and say ditto to Mr. Supelak's comments. And just to reiterate his final point, I think it comes down to the flow of people, right? And it's time-based. Are people staying for one day? Are they staying for 1 week? Are they going to have visitors or not have visitors? So I think flow of people should be obviously consideration. And Jenny, I'm sure you already know this, so I feel like silly telling you these things. But and then, light-based pollution, things like that, I know have been a consideration when we're near residencies, and that's been just a recent topic of discussion, but agree with what my fellow commissioners have said thus far.
Mr. Schneer, you want to round us out?
Sure, and I would echo the sentiments. I think we all have covered it. Especially hospital, it strikes me as it's an intentional euphemism, and I think we all know that there are different types, and it's right for NIMBY. I want this in my backyard. That's okay, but I don't want this in my backyard, especially when it comes to residential. So, the staff will have their work cut out for them in order to balance all the competing interests. But that's what we're all here for.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Staff, looking back to you, do you have everything on this particular item that you need from the commission?
Thank you very much.
Certainly. Okay, moving on. Case number 5, BSD review process code update. This is again administrative discussion only. This is an informal discussion regarding the need to add an additional option to the Bridge Street District review process, code section 153.066, to align with other processes and to potentially include provisions to allow for an amended final development plan. So Jenny, back to you for our case presentation.
Sure, I'll kick it off as I said, but if Claudia has something to add or I totally messed this up, then she can jump in and fix me up here. So this really stemmed from when we updated the Bridge Street Code process here within the last year and really tried to streamline the application types to match what is within the plan district. So the concept plan, preliminary, final. And then we also, as part of that amendment, had modified our minor project requirements to be more stringent and sort of really fit within the minor nature of that. But that has sort of created a little hole in the code of projects that maybe don't require that 3-step process of a concept, preliminary, final, which is very time consuming and cumbersome, but they don't fall in the minor project category either. And we had included an example in your memo about the McDonald's that was on Bridge Street, in that under the previous Bridge Street Code process, that would have been a minor project. But now under our revised code, that would fall under a project that would have to go through the 3-step process to get approval. And from staff's perspective, we are not feeling that that is the best use of everyone's time, energy, money, all of those things. But before we brought that forward, we wanted to get your feedback to see if you felt like that was an appropriate process change. So the recommendation from our end would be to then add this amended final development step, which would be also similar to what the PUD process has, where it's that sort of in-between piece. And then I'll stop and let Claudia chime in to see if there's anything else I'm missing here. So.
Yeah, I also thought about examples, and McDonald's came to mind as well, and they went to the planning commission because they needed the waivers. So that's how they ended up with you all. A similar situation is the Heartland Bank, and that is currently also an active application, but they are recladding obviously the 4 sides of their building, and the minor project limits improvements such as those to 25%, regardless of exterior modifications, additions, all of those things. So because it is 100% of the facade, they have to follow the 3-step process: concept plan, preliminary development plan, final development plan, where with an amended final development plan, we would probably have suggested go informally, get feedback from the commission, and then do your amended final development plan and be done with it, which is what typically happens in PUDs. So it does seem a little bit, I don't know, I can't think of another word than unfair, but it's burdensome for those smaller improvements that we want to see, but the fees for those types of cases are pretty substantial as well.
I support this.
Yep. So I would be in agreement also. Ms. Kennedy?
And Ms. Call, just a quick call out. I'm all for efficiency. Is there any downside that we're not talking about? Is there anything that we might miss? I mean, it seems pretty clear and straightforward, but would there be anything that we might consider that we might be amiss, or can you think of any examples where this might not work in our favor? And that's my only question. I can't think of one, but I just want to put it out there.
Well, I can't think of one either, especially because we have been doing this so much with the PUDs within the city. I mean, that goes back to, I don't even know, before I even started. So that's a long time. I really can't think of anything in the PUD process. You do have that minor text modification built in that you could do at an amended final development plan for the Bridge Street district that would then result in a waiver that could still be part of an amended final development plan.
Yeah. Now, Claudia, just for clarification, we always do have the option to go the 3-step process if a project comes forward and says, hey, we want to do this easier one, but they don't fall into the category. It's for whatever reason too cumbersome a transaction or too large of a project that it could be covered in something in the bypass type avenue.
Right. We would definitely have to write criteria that would qualify you for an amended final development plan.
Okay. So I heard consensus among the commission. Is there any further need for discussion? Okay, seeing none. It looks like we are done with that item. So I don't have, well, first of all, let me make sure we didn't have any public comment on that. I don't believe we received any for this evening, but
we did not any at all.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Moving on now to communications. Do we have communications from staff to the commission?
I do not have anything unless either Jane or Jenny want to talk about your meeting at the end of the day yesterday where you tried out meeting in person.
Yeah, we did do a demo of a hybrid solution where the council was our guinea pig for that. So looking at being the council members being in chambers with dividers and masks, but with also then a virtual option. So staff could be at home, applicants could be at home, the public could participate from home. Which I think is a really great solution. Council's biggest concern, and I obviously will let Jane chime in. I don't want to speak for all of council, but our takeaway was, it was a really great opportunity for the new council chambers. But at this point, the masks are really sort of a hindrance in person, and the way the camera would then track to you with the dividers is also really problematic. So I think the overall consensus that I got was at this time, not the best solution. It doesn't make it easier. Honestly, it kind of makes it harder. So we're going to stick with the virtual only for now, but at the ready should something change. And then I'll definitely let Jane chime in.
Yeah, it was just too hard. It's too hard to do it. It's much easier this way. You can see people's faces. But so I think Jenny explained that. But I did want to add that I asked council to allow us to schedule here in the fall another combined ARB, council and planning and zoning session via Zoom so that you have the opportunity to hear from council about what they've been doing, some policy issues, what they've been thinking about, and an opportunity for us, you and the ARB, to discuss any of the challenges or recommendations or just conversation, really. It's just a matter of being in communication with your council members and kind of staying in tune with each other about what's going on and sharing the conversations that you've been having. Very informal. I don't think that we're looking at having any kind of presentations. I think this is just an opportunity to have good conversation with your council members and bring up things that you're interested in, challenges you might have. So we'll let you know when that, we'll get a little notice out to try to find a date that works for everybody.
Thank you, Jane. And then last item that I had was just another request for the prep meetings more formalized. So Christina, I know that times are challenging and COVID kind of throws a wrench in everything. So you and I can always touch base an evening after a prep meeting if we want to set something up that Jane, myself, and staff have a lunchtime meeting, and then you and I have a little quick touch base in an evening, so that we have that continuity and that preparation time. That would be my only call out for communications.
What time is do you have the prep meeting locked in at a specific time then going forward?
We didn't. No, I think we were looking at like a 12 o'clock time frame. I was waiting to hear back from a couple other people before we set that officially. Would that be work for you? I know you're.
If you could add me to the invite, Jenny,
Sure,
that would be great. I can join sometimes, but not consistently.
Okay.
I'd like to at least have it on my calendar.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just a thank you to everyone. I know these times are challenging and everything is a little shaken up. So thank you everyone for your patience in the technology changes, the setting up your own workspace, the requirement to have technology experts in the four walls of your home. Everything is appreciated, and know that it does not go unnoticed. So thank you everyone for your time this evening, and we will see you again in just a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Bye, Rebecca. Good job.
Bye.
Bye.
Another great meeting.
It was. It's a great group.
It is a great group.
It is. I so enjoy it.
Well, I tell you, it really